Nancy. Thanks for being on the channel with me today.
Hi, Brewbird. I am thrilled to be here talking to you.
Great. So Nancy is my former teacher from the Kwantlen Brewing Program, and she's also Canada's first ever female head brewmaster. So I'm just delighted to have you on here, and yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about your career today. Yeah, so could you just kind of quickly introduce yourself and tell us how you got started in the brewing industry?
Sure. My name is Nancy Moore, and I studied chemistry at the University of Alberta and had the same attitudes to beer as most students did. I drank a lot of it. And when I finished, I wasn't even finished university, I saw an ad that said Labatt was looking for technical people, and I thought, that sounds like fun. So I went through the process of applying, and eventually they offered me the job, and I decided I would do it until it wasn't fun anymore. And the wonderful thing about this industry is that I lasted 27 and a half years in that business, and then I just switched to another company and kept on in the industry because it is fun. So I started as a technical trainee with Labatt, which meant I spent 3 years shoveling yeast, carrying malt bags, learning how to overhaul fillers, running basically every piece of equipment and learning about both the practical of jobs, but also reading and studying the science behind it, writing exams, sometimes acting as a supervisor for a department. So you really learned everything from every job in the brewery. And in fact, my very first day, and I think now this may have been deliberate, the first job they gave me was to go with the people that were unloading a rail car full of Karastan malt bags. And we had to take these 25 kilo bags off of the rail car, put them on pallets, take them up the elevator, and unload them up at the top of the malt room. And now I look back and I'm thinking, well, did they do that on my first day just to see if I was actually willing to do it? I'm not sure, but I did. And then I basically spent 3 years training, and I had some fascinating experiences because I was one of 2 women that were hired that year as trainees. And this was pretty new to a lot of people to have a woman. This was completely new to a lot of these people to have women in the brewery. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the people in the fermentation cellar were really concerned because they'd always been taught by the German brewers that if a woman came into the fermenting cellar and she had her period, that the yeast would stop fermenting. So there was a lot of very nervous people around there when I first showed up. But the good news is I did, it didn't. We all learned from it. So it was new for all of these guys. For me to work with them, from carrying malt bags, cleaning tanks in the cellars, basically doing everything. But the interesting thing to me, and the sign of the people in the brewing industry, is that the people that were probably the most skeptical, one fellow called me a heretic for thinking that men could work for women. But when it really came down to the summer and I was replacing his department supervisor, he was probably the biggest help to me. He came into the office to make sure that I understood everything that was going on so we could do a good job together. So it was, I think we all learned from that. I certainly did anyway, about how to work with people. And after finishing training, I did brewing training. I moved in Kitchener-Waterloo. I moved to London, Ontario, and worked in packaging there. And then I moved to Edmonton, Alberta, and did some more productivity work. And then I started my first real job as an assistant brewmaster. And I worked my way basically from there through different layers of management, from the assistant brewmaster to a quality manager. And then in 1985, 1988, I moved to St. John, New Brunswick, where I was given the job of the head brewmaster for Olin's brewery, the Olin Labatt brewery there. And that was a whole nother step up of learning to deal with people and manage them and lead them, more important. And there were lots of people there that every odd question about the brewery came to my phone. If someone wanted to know about beer, and sometimes I'd answer the phone and go, good afternoon, Nancy. And they would say, well, I need to talk to someone about beer. And it's like, yeah, what can I help you with? No, no, no. I really need to talk to someone who knows something about beer. And we go through this. And underneath, I was probably saying, you've got about 3 seconds to start listening to me before I hang up on you. But usually I was able to convince them that I knew something about beer. And my family loved that because it was a very impressive title to tell everybody. Where did I go from there? I came back to the West Coast. I ran quality for BC and out of New Westminster. And then I moved to Creston, BC, where I ran the Columbia Brewery for 5 years, which was an amazing group of people. We had ads that talked about the 99 people that care, and they absolutely made my job easier, and they made me work harder, because you don't want to disappoint people that care that much about what they're doing. And then it was someone picked up the phone one day. I picked up the phone one day and someone said, "Do you want to go to Russia?" And I couldn't think of any reason not to. So I picked up, and actually, it's probably a sign of I'm not sure what. Maybe I'm crazy, but I was on my way to a retreat center on somewhere off Vancouver, on one of the Gulf Islands, and I stopped and read an email on the way, and they said, if you can get to Brussels in 2 weeks with a Russian visa, you can. We have a Learjet chartered, and we're going to fly around Russia to all the breweries, and you can come and see what it's like. And it's like, okay. And so I proceeded to, on Gabriola Island, pulling in all sorts of favors from people that I knew, and got a Russian visa delivered to me at the Calgary airport, and landed in Brussels and made it on that trip. And that was my first introduction to, Siberia and Moscow and all the different breweries. And that was the start of 3 years of a great adventure. And in Russia, yeah, we really redeveloped all the breweries. We built new ones. We started a development program for the maltings. We we had to develop a new beer every 3 months for the marketing guys, and we had to teach the people about modern brewing techniques. So a lot of it was about teaching people how to not only technically make beer, but how to be great business people and leaders. So that was it was one of those days where someone offers you a chance, and I'm so grateful that I took it.
How were the breweries run in Russia and Siberia different compared to in Canada?
Well, so what the Soviets did in the early 70s, they built 200 breweries across Russia and the Ukraine, the whole former Soviet Union. And they brought in, there was a Czech model and there was an East German model, and they brought in the appropriate people to train them. And that's really where brewing stayed until the Western breweries came in and started working. So there was not only the technology differences, which we needed to teach them about what was modern. People, when I got there and I was talking to the scientific committee for brewing in the Russian Federation, they assured us that ale yeast could never grow to more than, I think it was 10 million cells per mil. It would never grow more than that. Well, it would. It would grow, as brewers all know, it grows to much higher concentrations than that. So we had to teach new methods of beer and much faster methods of brewing beer. They were still working on the old, let's leave the beer in the tanks for 6 weeks. I think and then the people, just teaching the people about different leadership methods, about talking to people. Yeah, I remember we sent, what's the word I'm looking for? One of our people that we thought was going to be a leader in the business, we sent him back to Toronto for 3 months to go to the Labatt Toronto brewery and just work there for a while and see what it was like. And Igor came back and he said, "Oh, Nancy," he says, I don't know what to say because I learned so much, but it really wasn't about technical brewing things. It was about how you people work in Canada." And I laughed because I said, "Igor, that was what you were sent there for." So it really was about learning new ways of working. We had to sort of get around the Soviet ways and teach them different leadership skills. So it was really exciting. We did so much new, and I realized one day that I knew I'd been successful when I realized that I could go out into the market in Moscow and I could drink any beer that we had produced. I could empty any bottle. I could actually drink the whole thing. Whereas when I got there, the shelf life of beer was about 3 days. So we were teaching them lots about microbiology and cleaning and things like that. So it was when the beer became stable enough to drink in public that I knew I had an impact there. So I spent 3 years there and had an amazing time. I learned some Russian. I learned enough Russian to get into trouble and out of trouble, but that was okay. And then InBev, I think by then we changed the name of Interbrew to InBev, and they asked me to come and work in the global innovation team. So I had a very fancy title. I was the global director of brewing product and process development, which meant that with all the breweries around the world, my team developed new beers, new global beers, and they developed new ways of making beer, looking at things like fermentation, learning about how do you control it so you got consistent beers, which was a whole new world for me. I never worked in research before. I found it a little frustrating because fundamentally at heart, I'm an operations person. So I like to see where I've been successful. And when I got there, some of these projects were like 10 years long. And so the achievements didn't come day by day. They came year by year. So that for me was a little difficult. And so I told everybody, get me back into operations. But it was interesting. I learned a lot. We had an amazing team of brewing experts, all the doctors of brewing that were in the technical centers. We had 3 of them, one in Korea, one in Leuven, Belgium, and one in London, Ontario. So we had this amazing team that, no matter what question I asked, somebody had the answer. So I learned a lot about brewing there.
I know you went to Africa. Oh, well, actually, I'll let you just continue. Sorry.
Africa comes next because I was going back and forth from Belgium to Canada a lot. The people at Diageo at Guinness came looking for me because they'd already hired away one of my colleagues. Another Labatt colleague was in the business, and he wanted someone to support him in what they called international beer supply. So John kept calling me and saying, "Come work with me. You'll have fun. And there's a great ways to make a difference in this business." And so I would, on my way back from Brussels to Canada, I sometimes stopped off at their offices to talk to people, and they really there were several things that really appealed to me about that that I was willing to make the change. One was when I walked into the head office at Park Royal, Hanger Lane, in London. There was a sign on the wall which was the company's purpose, and it was to celebrate life every day, everywhere. And I thought, I can do that. I actually want to work for a company that celebrates life. so it wasn't all about hard work. It was about doing great things and doing things. It was about helping people celebrate the milestones in their lives, and that's what we do as brewers. It's the thing that I think makes it such a great profession, that you can go out, at night or in the afternoon, and you can watch how your products are helping people have a better day, help them solving the problems of their lives, helping them celebrate what's going on. And that, I really love that. And I was really pretty close to retiring at Labatt, and the people in and I said that to one of the people that was interviewing me from Diageo, and I said, look, my goal is to finish off my last, I think it was 7 years at the time, and then go spend my time making the world a better place. Paying back for all the privilege and the all the success I'd had was not because of me. It was, I was in a privileged place to start with, with education and opportunities. And I will never forget, he looked me in the face and he said, Nancy, you can come and join us and work in Africa, and you will make that difference to people every day that you're there, and still get paid for it. So he really, that idea of making a difference through your work was incredibly appealing to me. It's part of my purpose in life, is to make a difference. It's part of the reason it is the reason I'm still teaching. Certainly not for the money. Sorry, Quentin. It's because I want to help raise the next generation of brewers. And it's not entirely altruistic. I also want to make sure that there's great beer being brewed out there. So I will always have some great beer to drink.
Wow.
So I jumped ship and I moved from London, Ontario to London, England, which was really confusing for all the movers to try and figure out where I was coming from and where I was going. But eventually, both me and my belongings arrived in London. But I really only spent maybe a quarter of the time in London. Most of the time I was on the road through Africa, Asia, basically international beer supply. We were responsible for all the beer outside of Ireland. Wow. So we had a lot of people on the road, and we were doing much the same as I was doing in Russia. And the wonderful thing for anybody who's ever thought of working in the developing world, and here's why you want to do it, because in North America, we work our hearts off to get 0.5% or a 1% improvement in something, whether that's in quality or cost or waste. But in the developing world, you can give somebody the right piece of information and they can make an improvement in what they're doing. 10%, 20% overnight. They can take that information, and so you're helping them make great beer, and you're helping them, again, become great leaders in their own countries. Because you can't run a brewing company from head office. It has to be done by the people in the countries, by the locals. So it's such a way to know that you're making a difference in the world. So yeah, Africa was fabulous. If anyone that's ever been to Africa will know exactly what I mean when I say Africa gets in your blood. And the people, just like the people, they're like the people everywhere in the world. People are wonderful. But in Africa, it's really such genuine warmth and caring, and caring for what they're doing, passion for life, passion for what they're doing, and they're happy. They're happier than we are.
Oh.
So it's a lovely place to spend time and to have great experiences. One of the weird things I got to do there, was that we'd been working with our South African teams to create and launch a new cider brand. And the people in South Africa, the team in South Africa, had worked really hard to find someone who could produce the cider for us, because we didn't have the right tanks in the business then. We had different yeasts. We didn't have cider yeasts. We didn't have any of those things. So we said, "Now, better, we'll pay you to produce it, and we'll develop the recipe, and then our people will take it and market it and sell it," which was really great up until about 2 to 3 months before our launch date. And everybody loves the liquid, and everybody loves what's coming out. And then the European company that actually owned the cider brand, because it was part of another brewery in Africa, they said, "No, we don't want to co-produce. We don't want to produce it for you. We don't want a contract brew." Because they hadn't been using the cider plant. It was sitting empty. And this was going to mean they were going to bring the cider, and the cider yeasts would need to go into their packaging plants. And that's anytime you have significantly different and non-culture yeasts in a brewery, you run the risk of cross-contamination. And they decided it was too high. So we went, "Oh, now what?" And the team in South Africa were amazing. They came back and they said, "We've done the business case on it. We think that if we buy that cider plant from them, we can keep on going. And if you can just give us, the assistance and the help and the team, legal and accounting and engineering to work on this project, we think we can make this happen." So I went and talked to my boss and said, "Okay, what do you think?" And I wasn't asking for very much money. All things considered, it was under £2 million. And as they told me in a big business like Guinness, £1 million is a rounding error, which kind of made me gulp.
Wow.
But they gave us permission, and the team worked through the night, through weekends. They flew back and forth from Europe to South Africa, and we bought a cider plant in about 3 weeks, and started it up and did the test running and made a really successful brand out of it. So that was something you don't often get to do. Anything so fast.
Yeah.
And at Diageo, we talked a lot about simpler, faster, better. Were three things that any company needed always to be. And everyone looked at that as an example of something we did simply, we did it faster, and it was better because we got our brand to the market. So you don't often get to do things like that. So I've been involved in all sorts of weird and wonderful projects just like that.
What was the name of the cider brand?
Oh, don't ask me. It was Foundry Cider, but there is also a Foundry Cider in North America, and it's not that one. So it was strictly for South Africa.
Okay.
But I think the thing about Africa that for me was really fulfilling was we were there at a time where most municipalities and cities didn't have, for example, effluent treatment plants. And so we went and we built our own effluent treatment plants for all of our breweries. We invested, I think one year it was 130 million pounds across Africa. And about half of that was environmental projects. Wow. We had to learn to do things like the water was a problem in some countries. So we started whole new processes of managing water for water-stressed areas. Like we collected rainwater from the roofs. We didn't use it in the beer, but we used it, for cleaning floors and other places in the brewery. One year in Nigeria, over the course of the year, we went from having electrical power from the grid from 75% of the time down to 4% of the time. It's really hard to run a brewery when you don't have electrical power.
Yeah.
So we figured out, the team figured out how to, first we installed generators, diesel generators, but that was really expensive, and environmentally it was a bad thing to do. So we had to install our own natural gas lines into the breweries and put natural gas in, both to save money and because environmentally it was the right thing to do. So it was just full of challenges that you would never get in North America, because in North America everything works. Sometimes it feels like it doesn't, but trust me, everything works. So yeah, Africa was brilliant for me because I went down there for a year and lived in Nigeria and worked with them on a year that they had a lot of big projects happening. But what I'm most proud of that there was when I left, I spent a lot of time coaching employees. They would just come to my office and they would talk to me about, how do you do this and what could we do? And after I left and I came home to Canada, two of them got big promotions, and they both called me to thank me. And they said exactly the same thing. And I think it's really an important thing for all of us in any business. They both said, Nancy, we got these jobs, and I think I got the job because of what you taught me. And sometimes the new job is really tough, but I sit down at my desk and I ask myself, what question would Nancy ask me right now? Because I tried always to avoid giving people answers. I always tried to ask them questions. And by asking them questions, then they learn themselves how to do it. And the fact that both of them said the same thing said to me that was a key part of how I contributed to that business that year, was teaching people the power of questions. So I came back to Canada in the spring of 2013, and it was just at the time that Kwantlen was thinking about starting up the brewing program. And sometime that summer, a friend of mine who worked at Kwantlen sent me the posting that said Kwantlen was looking for people to write curriculum for this brewing program. And I literally thought, I got nothing to do. I can do that. I had no intention of teaching. I was retired. And so I went out and I was interviewed, and Dominique Bernard and I ended up writing the curriculum together. So it was fun. If I knew now everything I knew then about teaching, it might have been different. But I think it was pretty good. And we were ready to start that first intake in 2014. And then Kwantlen came and said, did I want to teach? And I said, well, not full time. So we agreed so I was interviewed and I passed the interview, and they said I could come out and, I could teach as much as I wanted. So I come out one day a week. It still takes 5 days a week to do all the preparation, but I go out to Kwantlen, or I went out to Kwantlen, and I will again in the fall, go out one day a week and interact with the students. And again, that experience is about making a difference to all the young and old people that come to the program and are the next generation of brewers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is always about the people. I've been asked, what's the thing I'm most proud of? And I will tell you what I'm most proud of is the people that I have been involved with and worked with that are going out to do great things in our industry.
Okay. Wow, very cool. I did want to touch upon the fact that when you started, there was very few women in the industry. And so did you find it more difficult?
Oh, I'm not sure I was smart enough to know that. My parents had, so I come from a family of 4 girls. And whenever there was anything to be done, whether it was hauling rocks off of a new lawn or helping my father do something, around the house or the yard, we were it. So there was no differentiation in my life between what men did and what women did, because we were in the household. We were all dad's crew. And I think that there was never any question when I was being brought up about what I could or couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure I even realized it was a problem for a while, or that it would be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I just assumed that I was going to go, I was going to do a good job, and that was going to be it.
Okay.
And then, but there were, my very first Christmas party, or maybe the second one, in London, Ontario, and my boss hauled me over to meet someone. And this guy was just about the same height as me, which is not very tall. And he, I was introduced, and he looked at me, and he always had a cigar in his mouth. And he looked at me with his cigar in his mouth and looked me up and down. And he said, he says, "You're Nancy Moore. I've heard about you. Women of your persuasion don't normally make it in this business." And I go, okay. Didn't really know what he meant, but I wasn't going to question it. I was just, I was a trainee. Didn't question the big bosses. And a few years after that, I was doing a performance review, and the person that was giving it was responsible for quality right across Canada. And he said, "Well, what would you like to do in a few years?" And I said, "Well, I'd really like to do what you're doing." And he looked at me and he said, "Don't you think that's a little bit ambitious?" And I thought, nope. And in actual fact, I went far beyond where he was in the company. So I'm actually quite, I thought, no, I wasn't being too ambitious.
Yeah.
So there were, lots of times that, did I get tried on more than the guys did? Was it harder for me to start in the business in each new job? Yes, at the start. But I think eventually my reputation was made, and people understood that, no, I really did know what I was doing. And I'm still proud of the fact that in every job I had, somebody always walked up and told me I was the best boss they ever had.
Oh, really? That's
And
nice.
I think I kept on going. I kept on, beating my head against the opposition that I think I didn't even realize was opposition until much later. And I realized that life wasn't like this for everybody else. I realized that I had a different vision of what leadership was and how you could run a business. And I just wanted to keep going until I could get to the position to show people that my ideas worked. And they did, and I did. So it really was a different model. There was all sorts of problems, like, people thought that after a brewers meeting, it was acceptable to go to a strip club. And frankly, I wasn't interested, didn't want to go, but it excluded me from the discussions and the team building that went on in those things. And not everybody was like that. I had bosses I worked for, and I'll call out people like Ivan Garrison and Bill White, Steve Kwai, who were all men who, when they realized what was happening, I remember Bill White, after a team went out for a final lunch with someone and chose to go to a strip club that they knew I wouldn't go to, instead of me being able to join them. They thought it was more important to go there. And I was furious. I literally left the brewery that afternoon, went on my bicycle and rode very fast a long ways, just trying to burn off the energy. And I stewed about it all weekend, and I went in on Monday morning, and I before Bill arrived in his office, I was standing in front of his office door, and he looked at me and says, he says, "I thought about you all weekend." And what he said was, that will never happen again. Not as long as I'm in this business, that will never happen again. And he made sure it didn't. So it wasn't all bad. There were people in there that they helped me be successful. And all of us can find diversity. And the thing that I'm concerned about now is the stories I hear from young people in the industry, women, BIPOC, gender fluid, or different sexual orientations, minorities in our business, is that they're facing the same sort of situations that I did. And as an industry, we need to change that, because those are brilliant people that we're not giving a fair chance to. And now I'll get off that soapbox. But it's an important one.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. I just want to move on to some subscriber questions. So the first one is from Walter L. What are some of the best practices for a diacetyl rest?
Okay, I try and teach my students that in microbiology. There's two things that are really important about the diacetyl rest. And so if you can do those, if you can manage both of those, then you will be best practice. And the first one is that we know that the flavors, most of the flavor production by the yeast happens in the first 60 hours of the fermentation while the yeast is growing. It's in the yeast growth phase that the metabolism of flavor development takes place. So, and the temperature is really important to that. So one of the first thing is you need to make sure before you start a diacetyl rest that your major flavor development has taken place. Because if you raise the temperature too early, you're going to get more esters and you're going to get more higher alcohols. So you'll change the flavor of your beer. And then you think about, what are we trying to do in the diacetyl rest? Well, we're trying to raise the temperature. And by raising the temperature, we do two things. We increase the conversion step. So I'm going to stop there. The whole diacetyl production and reduction process is 3 steps. There's formation, happens earlier. Then there's conversion of the diacetyl precursor, acetolactate, into diacetyl itself. And then the yeast reduces the diacetyl into 2,3-butanediol that has a very low flavor threshold and is inoffensive in the beer. So the increase in temperature in the diacetyl rest increases the conversion because it's a chemical process, not a yeast process, the conversion. So it increases the conversion, and it also will increase the reduction, the ability of the yeast to reduce the diacetyl. It takes the diacetyl back into the cell and reduces it to 2,3-butanediol. So you need to get an increased temperature. That's the important part of the rest. So you need to start that diacetyl rest at a time that there's sufficient gravity, fermentable gravity, left to cause the temperature to increase. So late enough that the esters and higher alcohols have already formed, but early enough that there is still fermentable sugars left to cause the temperature to increase and cause the diacetyl process to come to completion. So we usually say final gravity. I like to measure that by doing a quick fermentation where at the start of the fermentation, you take a small sample of wort, you throw a bunch of yeast in, oxygenate it by stirring it up and let it ferment out. And you'll find out what the final gravity of your beer is going to be. So if you take final gravity plus, 1.5 to 2 degrees Plato, you have enough gravity left there to cause the temperature rise that you require to finish off the diacetyl.
All right. Thank you for that.
Well, Brewbird,
Well,
how did I do? Is that a
yes,
good
it was very
explanation?
thorough. You just went into teacher mode. Your whole demeanor changed when you were answering it.
Now, really, what I should have done is have you answer that, because you know the answer to that question.
I don't remember. All right, next question. From Matthew Baker. What trends do you think will become more popular in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, 5 to 10 years is a long way out in the brewing industry. So I'm not sure that I wouldn't even start that one. I think right now, clearly what's happening is lots of focus on fruit beers, which is bringing in portions of the population that don't like really bitter beers. I I think that what has been happening is I'm seeing more breweries getting good at making lagers. Therefore, the question on the diacetyl rest is really, really important. And I think that as the craft brewing industry wants to grow, it's going to need to grow into a bigger population beyond the beer geeks. So I think you will find more breweries making sure they've got a pale ale or a golden ale or a lager in their portfolio. The other one I would like to see is that there's been a lot of brewers focusing on really big, high alcohol beers, which is okay, but I like drinking beer. So I would rather drink 2 beers at 5% than 1 beer at 10%. So I actually do go to my local beer store or my local brewery, and I look for a lower alcohol beer so I can drink more beer. And from a economic point of view, as a brewer, you're not going to get that much more money for a 10% beer than you are for a 5%, and you're throwing a lot of more materials into that process. So that one I think is good for everyone. And globally around the world, there's more people interested in mid-strength, lower alcohols, and non-alcoholic beers. Non-alcoholic beers are growing. They're a bit of a challenge because there are some safety concerns. If you take the alcohol out, it's one of the protectors of the growth of pathogens in beer. I tell people to drink, if they're in a developing country, drink beer, because the combination of alcohol, hops, CO2, high CO2, low oxygen, and low pH protect the beer. So you can't get sick from beer. But when you remove the alcohol, that's a bit of a risk. So I think brewers that are going to go into non-alcoholic beers had better seriously think about how are they protecting themselves and the consumer with the alcohol missing. But I think it's definitely going to grow. I'm now keeping non-alcoholic beers in and I'll give a shout out to Gary and the group at Central City that when they put their reverse osmosis equipment in and new pasteurization equipment, street legal became a fixture in my fridge, because sometimes I don't need the alcohol. I just want to drink a beer.
This next one, it's a little bit of a complaint about your old company, Labatt. Okay. He asks, Jason Bellevue asks, why is Labatt Blue so inconsistent from one bottle to the next?
All right, and I'm going to say it shouldn't be. And I left Labatt, long time ago. I don't even want to count. 16 years ago, I guess now. So I can't tell you what they're doing now, but I can tell you the best practice that you can use and should be being used, I hope it's being used, is what used to happen is, first of all, when you make beer, you don't have you have a recipe, but the recipe is fluid. It changes. What you want to aim for is a set of end specifications that is what the consumer is looking for. And the consumer knows beer. They drink more of our beer than we do, really. They also drink more in terms of taste panel. We frequently do well, our tasting is mostly sip testing, as opposed to they drink a whole bottle. So the other thing that I think is really important is what certainly used to happen is what was called an interplant exchange. And if someone's got two breweries out there, this is my recommendation: is there's blind tasting of the beers of one brand of all the different breweries, so that you can. And we did this at Guinness. All the Guinnesses from around the world would go to Dublin, and the Dublin panel tasted, and they're tasted against each other to make sure that all of them are within a commercial spectrum. So I don't know where you're tasting yours, but I have great respect for consumers and their ability to tell when there's things wrong. And if I can tell one more story, I was in Russia and I got a call from one of my technical people going, "You need to get down to Saransk Brewery in a hurry, Nancy. There's a whole bunch of beer here we don't think should be sold. Can you get on the train and come down?" Well, there was we always stayed in the first class cars where you got to sleep on your own, and there wasn't any first class tickets available, and I needed to get there. So the company bought me 4 second class tickets, which meant I had the whole train compartment to myself because I was going to be sleeping overnight. So I got on the train, and man, my Russian was getting okay by that point in time. And the train conductor woman came along and asked for the tickets. And she looked at them and said, "There's 4 tickets." And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Where's the others?" And I said, "Nope, they're all for me. I'm staying here alone." And we repeated this a couple of times until she was convinced no one else was coming. And she took the tickets and went away. And then she came back with the police.
Oh my God.
A young soldier, a young Russian soldier. And he was clearly the security person on the train. And he came in and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to Saransk." "Well, what are you doing there?" I says, "I'm going to the brewery. I'm going to visit the brewery." And he immediately sat down across from me and proceeded to explain how when he drank Tolstya, fat man beer, stout man beer, when he drank it in Moscow, he really, really liked it. And when he drank it in Saransk, he didn't like it. And he said, "And why is that?" He says, "Now I go to Moscow on the train and I buy beer from Moscow and I bring it there." Well, the beer from Moscow was being brewed at another brewery that was closer to Moscow. And so and I said, "Well, what do you taste?" And he started, my Russian wasn't that good. But by the end of it, I said, "That's actually why I'm going there. I'm going to work on that problem." And he said, "Oh, good. Do a good job." And he smiled and thanked me and he left. And that was it. I locked the door and I went down. But that consumer can tell the difference. So I have Nancy's 10 rules of brewing. And that's number 1, respect your consumer. That if the beer doesn't taste good and if the consumer doesn't think it tastes good, then it's not good beer. So I would phone the brewery and go, "I think your beer is inconsistent. And there should be someone there in the quality department that's interested in listening to you about that."
Okay, thank you for that. Right. Yes, our next question comes from Scott Clay. What are your thoughts on kveik yeast?
I think kveik yeast is what every home brewer needs to have. And it's also, so I brewed for it the first time a few years ago. And the thing that I love about it is that it ferments at a very wide range of temperatures. To ferment beer at 30 or 37 degrees with the Saccharomyces cerevisiae or Pastorianus, the culture yeast that we use, that would be unheard of. Your yeast would be dead. So what you've got is a yeast that's really resilient and able to work without great temperature control. So if you're doing brewing at home, this is a whole lot easier. Or if you don't have good temperature control or enough of a glycol supply in your brewery, it's great for summer brewing. It produces lovely citrus, pineapple flavors. So if you like those, and they're those are very popular flavors right now. So the consumer likes them as well. And I'm gonna can I tell another story?
Oh,
Sorry,
yes.
I'm full of them.
Love your stories.
So the first time I brewed with kveik was Martina, who's the laboratory manager, instructor at Kwantlen. We were getting ready for our Pink Boots International Women's Day brewing. So we wanted to try this stuff first. And Martina and there was a student with us, and I don't remember who it was. The three of us were brewing this trial beer, and I'm a stickler. I'm always asking people if they have enough oxygen. So Martina's going, yes, and there's 3 valves, and we have to open the 3 valves on the oxygen system to put it make sure that all the oxygen's in. And it's our little wort cooler is designed, for more normal temperatures, maybe 10 to 20 degrees Celsius is what it's used. So we were trying to cool in at 30 degrees. And so it was really, we were having a lot of problems controlling the speed and the cooling. And we got finished, and Martina looked at me and said, oh my God, there were 4 valves. So we had done this entire cooling with no oxygen going into the wort, which is, no oxygen, no growth. So there we sat going, all right, what are our options? And we plugged a oxygen line to the bottom of the tank and let it bubble up through it. That wasn't going to be entirely successful. We thought we'd try. And then we sat down and said, okay, what are our options? Well, we looked at, there's a Master Brewers technical article about the people at New Belgium who a few years ago had done some trials, and we replicated some of them at Kwantlen, that the role of the oxygen is to create the new membrane material to enable yeast growth. So you put a little bit of yeast in, you add the oxygen, you grow it up until you get enough to do the fermentation. So what New Belgium had done is they had used olive oil and put olive oil in with the yeast, and then no oxygen, fermented, worked well. Flavor was good. Our people, Derek and John, had tried it at our brewery once, but all of those ones had added the yeast 5 hours before the pitching. And we didn't have that because it was 6:30 at night and we wanted to go home. So then we thought, okay, well, if we can't grow yeast, can we put some more in? And Martina went, aha, she had propagated the yeast. So she still had a big 5-liter flask of yeast that she propagated. So she brought it over and we sat on the floor. We divided it in between 2 flasks, put a foil top on it, and we shook the yeast for, I don't know how long we sat there. But by shaking the yeast, we were entraining oxygen into it. And then we just put it all into the fermenter. So we had overpitched. We'd put as much oxygen as we could in, but we weren't really convinced. We really didn't know what was going to happen. And the next morning, there was someone coming in the next morning. So I said, tell me what, and by the next morning, we'd brewed it, I think, 13 Play-Doh, and it was down to 5 Play-Doh. So it had more than fermented out, so it saved us. It was a great tasting beer, but who knew? So it's very resilient. I still advise putting oxygen into your wort as you're cooling it. So yeah, ferments quickly, makes fruity tasting beers, and it's dead easy to use.
Thank you so much for talking to me today, Nancy. I know you've got to run as well. You've got a yoga class you've got to catch. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure people will enjoy this. You always have the best stories anyway.
Thank you for asking me and for inviting me and for listening.
All right. Okay, I'll see you. Bye.